Hello, everyone. Good evening and welcome. My name is Rowan Neufeld. I'm the events coordinator for McNally Robinson Booksellers in Saskatoon. From this end, we're streaming live from Treaty 6 territory, homeland of the Métis Nation, and the traditional lands of the Plains Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota. So I'd like to welcome you to the launch of Reindeer Reflections, Lessons from an Ancient Culture by Jerry Haigh. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I'd also like to thank Rocky Mountain Books for working with us on tonight's event. So before I pass things along, I have a couple of brief Zoom housekeeping items. We've enabled live auto captions tonight, which you can access by clicking the live transcript button along the bottom of your screen. And we've also got a special guest host tonight who's going to introduce Jerry in a moment. Welcome, Danica Lorer. Hello, Danica has spent the past 20 years as a professional oral storyteller. She's been struck by lightning, a moose, a rogue semi-tire, vehicles, and the odd strange idea. She's a freelance writer, face and body painter, poet, event organizer, library programmer, workshop facilitator, as well as the host of Shaw Spotlight Saskatoon's literary arts program, Lit Happens. Danica has also been published in Untethered, Tonight It's Poetry's Poetry All Over the Floor, Grain Magazine, Release Any Words Stuck Inside of You, Spring, and Alice Unbound, Beyond Wonderland. And she is here tonight to host this launch. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to you. Welcome, Danica.
Thank you so much, Rowan. It's such a delight, and I've just been scrolling through the participant list on the screen, and I see friends from far and near from across the country on the list. So we are so grateful that you're here with us tonight. I always like to make mention of this land that we live in as well. Here in Treaty 6 territory, we are so lucky to be in a place where people have gathered to listen and tell stories since time immemorial. So I am looking forward to an evening of story, an evening of conversation. Jerry will read a few pages from the book, and we will hopefully have the opportunity to have all sorts of emotional connections to this work. I've known Jerry for about 14 years. We've served on boards together. We have been in different parts of the country at the same time at conferences. We've run through airports and to catch buses, dragging suitcases. We also gave a presentation together in Vancouver a couple of years ago, a masterclass. And I appreciate all of those times, but the times I appreciate the most are when we can sit at a table and we are with a small group or in a circle and we can listen to each other's stories. And so many of the stories that we find in Jerry's books, including this latest book, I've heard him tell in real life. And so I'm really excited that you'll get to listen to him tell some of these stories tonight too. Jerry's stories take us here and there and everywhere. They fill our imaginations with the exotic as well as the familiar. So Jerry has many, many wonderful experiences and a life that has just been so richly lived. It has taken him from Glasgow and Kenya to Saskatoon. And we're going to start our conversation. We're going to start our conversation here. But before we do, I just want to remind you that if you have questions, we'll have some time at the end and you can put them in the Q&A, and we won't get to them right away, but we'll keep watch. So if you think of something, you can type it in right away so you don't forget, and then we'll get back to those questions closer to the end of our session. But I wanted us to start at the beginning of this book, the beginning of Jerry's time here in Saskatoon and his first day at the zoo. Now, Jerry was still tired when he got to the zoo, but when he arrived and started to walk around, he recognized a creature in one of the enclosures, but he didn't recognize the name. And so we're going to start with that as a question. Jerry, explain to us this little confusion that you had on that very first day.
Great, good, will do. Well, what happened was that I entered the zoo, having met the director of the zoo, and walking around looking at all the animals, and round a corner, there was a pen with reindeer in it. And I said to Brent, reindeer? How come you've got reindeer in Canada? And he said, no, they're caribou. I said, come on, they're reindeer. And we went over to the pen, and lo and behold, on a small sort of plaque like that, it said caribou. Okay. He explained that they were more or less the same thing. So I thought, well, I don't understand. Let's go back to the vet school because I know they're reindeer. So I went up and found the book, The Mammals of Canada, and there are 4 pages headed in caps by reindeer stroke caribou with the same taxonomic name, Rangifer tarandus. Okay, so I read some more. And then I realized that these were indeed caribou when it came to Canada. And the point is, in Canada, the wild ones are indeed caribou, but in the whole of Eurasia, the wild ones are reindeer. Exactly the same name as I just said. Those are the wild ones. The domestic ones everywhere are reindeer. If you're confused, I've vaguely got it right, I think, with that.
Well, and you've touched on something that I don't have a very good grasp on all the time. And you've worked in so many different ways with so many different types of animals, both wild and domesticated. And I want you to tell us a little bit more about domestication and what that means to us as human creatures in this world that shares our world with all sorts of other creatures.
Fair enough. Well, domestication needs to be defined, and there are lots of different definitions. But if we think about the oldest creature that was domesticated by humans, it's almost certainly the dog, something like 15,000 years ago. Just think for a moment. A wolf has become an Irish wolfhound or a pocket poodle, and they all derive from wolves. That's a pretty staggering time. Over 15,000 years, we've changed things. And here's a little bit from the book by Dr. Finstad of the Reindeer Research Program, and I'm read out exactly what he said. He defines domestication as the process of genetically manipulating an animal or plant through artificial selection to better suit the needs of human beings. He explains, animals are considered to be domesticated when they are kept for a distinct purpose. Humans control their breeding, their survival depends on humans, and they develop traits that are often not found in the wild. It's more than simply taming. When it comes to reindeer, the genetic components include changes such as shortened broad head, prominent forehead, shortened limbs, and calmness. There are also changes in coat colors. They include piebald and spotted reindeer, and the millennial long-term selection of white-colored animals chosen as totems for the Tsaatan herders of Mongolia. So there you are.
All right. Now, one of the lovely things that you get when you have this book in your hand are pages and pages of beautiful full color photographs. And Jerry sent me a few of them ahead of time. And we're going to share a few throughout the course of this discussion. And the first photograph I'm going to share is just absolutely delightful to me. And I'd really love it if you could tell us a little bit more about this photograph, Jerry.
Well, this photograph was taken by a member of my writing group, Charlene Wirtz, and it shows her mother, Elaine, riding a bike on the family farm with Miss Minnie Miracle on the one side and Raffy the dog on the other side. You'll notice there are no leashes. They're just out for a ride. And that I couldn't resist when she sent me that as a fabulous example from Wadena, Saskatchewan. Talk about close to home. So that's that one.
Okay, and then I'm going to pull up another photograph. And this one, all of these will be familiar to you. Let's see.
Okay, this is in Mongolia, amongst the Tsaatan people that I already referred to in that domestication situation, we're out in the mountains. You can see some of the slightly higher ones above. And I'm at one of these tents. They call them yurts. They're very like a teepee, except they don't have the smoke flaps that everybody's familiar with. And I come out, stand outside, and 4 reindeer walk up to me as if to say, who's this guy? Let's check him out. They walk to me. I didn't walk to them. So they're truly domesticated.
And they look so tame in that photograph, and you look so calm with them as well. Now, I've always lived in Canada. I haven't had the adventures that you have, and in my life, most of the time when I've heard the word reindeer, it's been connected, of course, to Santa's sleigh and Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer, of course, the most famous reindeer of all. Is there any connection to reality when you think about Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer?
Well, we go back to the poem, which of course is adapted from a much older anonymous one in which Rudolph wasn't mentioned. But that's become a very popular one. Bing Crosby, Elvis Presley, that's my favorite. I'm an Elvis fan. But the truth is yes to your question, but in kind of bizarre and unexpected way. I'll let you guess when this paper, this scientific paper in a very prestigious journal, the British Medical Journal, was published. So I'll get to the story. This reindeer on a leash is led into a laboratory with a lot of expensive stuff, and it's just like a well-trained dog at heel. And it's brought round and it's put on a trampoline, and it starts to walk. Now, we know from other science that reindeer noses are phenomenally complicated, and that's been reported. And this demonstration shows how that is. They can breathe out at 37 degrees air from their body and save most of that heat, so it actually comes out the end of the nose at 21 degrees, or in one extraordinary case at 6 degrees. Imagine you saving 31 degrees between your lungs and the air. You can't afford to be breathing in minus 25 or whatever it is air. So that is phenomenal. And the reverse is true. If you're breathing in too hot air, which certainly happens in some countries, you can defuse the situation. And if you imagine this phenomenal insulation coat on a reindeer and put yourself in its position, you're wearing a down parka, it's 40 degrees outside, and you're trying to sprint 100 yards. You'd be in serious trouble. And the same applies to the reindeer. You need to have that amazing ability, and it's all in the capillaries at the end of the nose. It's like a heat exchanger in a car radiator. And so what this animal on the trampoline is doing is the trampoline gets slightly faster and slightly faster using a very special camera that producing colors that the human eye can't see, a heat thermal camera it's called. Lo and behold, as the trampoline gets faster, the end of the nose goes red. And have you guessed when the paper was published? Which month?
Christmas time. December.
Of course. And it's lovely. There are journals that do publish serious science with a funny twist. And that's one of the best ones I know.
Mm-hmm. So we have a reindeer on a piece of exercise equipment that humans use on the treadmill, going faster and faster. We have your work in the zoo, but you've also done work in the wild in Canada. And that's a really interesting switch from working with domestic animals to working in the wild. So what can you tell me about that work with animals in the wild?
Well, I guess I was lucky. I'd been working on a moose project in Saskatchewan, and then a similar program, somebody found out I was doing that work, immobilizing radio collars, weighing, all that sort of stuff, collecting blood samples, body lengths, leg length, lots of stuff like that for the biologists. And I was doing the immobilizations, and a fella in Alberta, Rochester, Alberta, heard about this and watched me working and said, "Can you help? I'm having trouble with caribou." So lo and behold, we moved up to the Birch Mountains Provincial Park, and yes, we were doing some caribou work, the same thing. Luckily at this point, because it wasn't working initially, because I was still learning about caribou, 2 memory clicks occurred in my head. One was that with the moose, I'd managed to get the dose exactly right so we could catch them and walk them out absolutely gaga, but still walking to a place where we could weigh them. Now, how are we going to weigh them? That goes back to Africa. And here's the picture.
Okay.
We're weighing an elephant. We're not weighing it, but we're carrying it under a helicopter. I can't see the whole elephant under the helicopter. Can you adjust the screen a bit in some way that folks can see the elephant? There it is. Okay. So this baby elephant was lifted out of a big swamp and taken to holding corrals in a conservation program. And that clicked. There was a good way to weigh caribou and indeed moose prior to that. So we made a special sling and weighed both the moose and the caribou underneath a helicopter. And that gave us accurate data. And that was very valuable to the scientists. So that was one of the wildlife projects I got involved with.
All right. So I find that so interesting to see the animals. And I think on one of your other books, it's actually a cover picture, another animal in a helicopter in the of moose and men. There's
That's right.
a lovely photograph on the cover of that one. So you haven't only worked here in Canada with reindeer, you've also traveled to other parts of the world to find out more. Well, tell me a little bit about the reindeer in other parts of the world.
Well, I was lucky enough again to meet an extraordinary veterinarian from Helsinki. And we got to know each other a bit. We enjoyed a glass of something nice. And he invited me to go to Finland in a year when I had time off, a sabbatical from university. Now, sabbaticals are not something that you go and lounge about on a beach in Bali. Oh, no. You have to submit a big proposal. It has to be approved. And then luckily, hopefully you'll get a permission. It's every 7 years. So I took that sabbatical year and we flew off via Holland, where my sister-in-law lives, and up through Denmark into Sweden, where I met my first domestic reindeer and had my first sauna, and then on to Finland, where I met Harry Ilanka. And again, stroke of luck, he said, well, there's a reindeer biologist heading north, and he's leaving on Monday, so would you like to join him? Talk about a stroke of luck. Yes, of course. We drove up to the town of Rovaniemi, where we then went north and worked on reindeer and did a whole lot of blood sampling and watched them processing the reindeer. These are reindeer domestic for the meat purpose only. They're not ridden, they're not milked or anything. And I think you have a picture showing some of the work that the guys are doing when we happened to show up, which was kind of lucky that I got the picture. So here are a group of Finnish reindeer herders, and they're all having a nice visit. They're all standing around and what have you. They've caught one of the reindeer. They're going to take him off and handle him. They're going to release this one because he's got big antlers on him, but he's a domestic animal. Others, the youngsters, they're going to ship to a slaughter plant and produce wonderful reindeer meat. They do smoked reindeer, they do steaks, all sorts of lovely stuff. And you can see this is just a bunch of good guys having a good time. And the corral, you'll notice, is at least half snow fence, which is not quite what we might call a safe corral for beef cattle in this country. So there we were in Finland. Then we went back down to Rovaniemi to visit Santa Claus's workshop. Now, Rovaniemi has declared it Santa's starting point. It's the whole home of Santa. So we went into this one shop called Santa's Workshop to look around. And there is the lovely Jo sitting on a whole pile of reindeer herds. And by good fortune, she has a red coat. They put a red Santa Claus hat on top of her. You can see all the Santa material behind. And I sort of wondered if at this point she wasn't auditioning for being one of Santa's helpers, because it fits exactly.
Well, she does look lovely, and it it makes us think that the holiday season's coming up, and what better gifts than books? And we're of course talking about a book that would make a lovely gift for a lot of your friends over the course of the coming holiday season. So I'm just always delighted when I see that picture of Jo, and I know that she's been such a wonderful part of so many of your adventures. But we're going to move into a completely different part of the world now, because this book takes us to so many different places. And the next stop in the stories is Mongolia. So can you tell us a little bit about what took you to Mongolia?
Well, a young woman drove up to Saskatoon, 22 hours from Boulder, Colorado, to ask me if I'd be interested in going to Mongolia to help with some work they were doing. They were doing disease investigation. They were concerned about inbreeding. She wanted to know if I had the knowledge. Well, I was able to fill her in that I did have some experience with that, especially in reindeer and caribou. So next thing, I'm on a plane via Vancouver and then Beijing, which the airport makes Heathrow look like a deserted shopping mall. It was unbelievable. But anyway, on to Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia, and then the horrendous journey up to where the reindeer herders live in the Sayan mountains. And on the way, for 10 hours, we hadn't seen another vehicle. We aren't on a road. We're just crisscrossing a bunch of paths that drivers have chosen their own routes where they thought it might be nice to go. And suddenly we come across a vehicle, and right beside it is a motorcycle and sidecar doing nothing. And the guy walks over to the van we're in, and we're in the van behind this car that you can see in the picture. And he speaks to the driver in Mongolian, of course. And the driver goes back, Gallo was his name, and opens up the trunk. You can just see the van at the back behind the green vehicle, which is the first vehicle of any sort we have seen in 10 hours. And there's almost a road there. And the driver, Gullah, guddles about under the truck. He lifts all the luggage out of the back, guddles about under the wheel well, as it were. There's probably 75 different bits of metal, bolts and nuts and all goodness knows what. He emerges a moment later with a single bolt, about yay long. He walks over to the motorcycle and sidecar. We don't really know how long he's been there. The chap's wife is sitting there in her purple dell. That's what they call those wonderful garments. And they bend over together. Gala does something or other, stands up. The guy climbs back onto his motorcycle, hits the Kickstarter, and they vanish into goodness knows where. So out of all those bits and pieces in the van, he's got exactly the right bolt. Amazing.
Oh, okay. And then after the motorcycle, I have another photograph that will lead to another story, I'm sure.
Okay, now, this is the horse that I'm going to spend 3 weeks on up in the mountains. The next year is a different colored horse, but this is the one that I'm the first year. And lo and behold, I haven't ridden since I was 9 years old. This is near a home where we're going to get on these horses and head up into the mountains. And I'm a bit concerned. So I say this to Morgan, the young woman that I met in Saskatoon, that I'm worried about this, and, you know, I didn't know how I was going to get on. And so she turned to Bayern, whose name you will hear in a moment when I start reading it, and says, he's concerned about the riding in Mongolian, fluent Mongolian. She repeats what I have said. And so that's fine. And Bayern grins and helps me get up on the horse, and we head off into the mountains, and he keeps an eye on me for a bit. And then here is what happened. And again, I'm going to read a little bit. It's not very long, but it kind of tells the situation. And let me turn to the right page. That'll help. So we've just had a cup of tea in this lovely home, and we're heading off to get on our horses. With tea all done, we left the gare and walked to the fence area by the horses. Borhu, who by the way was a veterinary technician, stubbed out his roll-your-own underfoot and moved to join the men, who were tying gear firmly to the pack saddles of half a dozen horses with several lengths of rope. My bag, stretching from shoulder to hip on a dark bay, took up one side. As for our own saddles, I'd never seen one like these on the riding horses. I was used enough to the high pommel Western saddles of North America and Max's saddle, Max was a horse I'd ridden as a kid. Had been the traditional English kind. Here there were two distinct styles. The most striking, a traditional Mongolian one with intricately decorated wooden pieces that reached up a good 15 centimeters fore and aft. The others had metal arches in front and behind the leather seat. That's one of the old Russian military type, explained Morgan. The latter was past its sell-by date, and to the bum-breaking surface, a cushion had been added. This would prove to be important. The saddle, with a blanket under it, was tied to the horse with a variety of lengths of rawhide rope, cinched down, and a single twisted strap tightened with a buckle. I suppose I'd have called the mishmash a girth. The reins were unusual. Made of knotted lengths of grey-white rawhide, my inexperienced eyes looked very short. Morgan described another cultural norm. You must never stoke over a horse's reins. It's simply taboo. She then asked Bayernmunk, the wrangler, a brief question in Mongolian as she turned towards me, pointing to a bay gelding standing quietly by the group. That's your horse, she said, and don't ever call him a pony. Has he got a name? I asked in one particular. Bindi, our translator, replied at once. No horse ever gets named in Mongolia. Why? There are just too many of them. This was the moment. I'd been worrying about this phase of the trip for quite some time. It would be fair to say that I'm an inexperienced rider. Apart from a single 1-hour session on one of my neighbor's horses a week before leaving home, I had not ridden a horse for 53 years. After Aerting in 1950, near Hanover, where my dad was posted, with Max, was my first proper session in the saddle. Here I was faced with several multi-hour days on a seat and mount that weren't quite what I had anticipated. I looked at Morgan. I'm a bit worried. Please ask Bayernmunk to keep an eye on me. I haven't ridden a horse since I was 9 years old. Don't worry, she said, as she turned back to the man who would have my welfare in his hands for the next 3 weeks. In rapid and what sounded like seamless Mongolian, she spoke a few sentences. He gave a wide-eyed grin, nodded, and offered me a leg up as I mounted. We set off up the hill, close to the edge of the larch forest. Pretty soon the group strung out, but Bayernmunk stayed back, not far behind me, no doubt paying mother hen as much for his horse as for me. After all, I was, by their standards, a big guy, at least 10 kilos heavier than anyone else in the party. The saddle was more comfortable than I had expected, but the metal loop on the Russian saddle worried me a bit, being very close to my belly. However, it soon proved useful, as the metal arch gave me something to grab when we rode up or down the many steep slopes that were part of our route and over the next while. My anxiety level soon diminished, as muscle memory and the actual feel of the horse became second nature. As we crossed the first ride, Bindi dropped back to chat. You know, she said, Morgan got her numbers wrong. She mixed them up when she translated your request. What she actually said was, this man feels like he's 9 again when he gets on a horse.
Oh, Jerry, I love that story. I've had a chance to hear you tell it, different versions of it over the years. We have a little bit of interaction in the chat, and I know we're going to move on to a couple more stories, but Kathy Jessup, who we both know, a lovely storyteller, her comment is, Jerry, if anyone else described your life full of adventures, they'd be accused of exaggerating. And I think we all sort of feel like that when we listen to your stories, because none of us have had these incredible adventures. So
hang on a minute. You and Kathy both can create stories out of the air. That's not something I'm very good at. I have to read them, and then I can have a go. But imagination to create new stories?
Oh, but you get to live them. And then we have a question from Tim Roberts. And Tim Roberts writes, Jasper Evans was a famous rancher in Kenya, whom I know you knew, Jerry. Did you ever meet him in Mongolia?
No, but I certainly knew him in Kenya, and there was one quite funny incident. I was due to go and castrate a horse for him, and I was on the way to another project when I got a telegram. Some of you are old enough to know what a telegram is, on funny yellow paper with writing and words stop every now and again. And Jasper sent this brief telegram. He was very shrewd. He wrote, "Stallion killed by lion, operation obviated." That's it.
Oh my. Okay, I'm just going to read a couple more comments before we move on to the next bit. Lori Fraser says, awesome, thank you. People are enjoying the stories. And then Diane McCauley said, my dad said truth is stranger than fiction. So, and we both know Diane well here in Saskatoon. All right, and Jeanette is saying she has to run. Jeanette Montgomery says she has to run, but she enjoys hearing the story, and the book is definitely going on her Christmas list. It was great seeing you both. So we're going to get out of the chat, and we're going to go back to some of the things that we wanted to talk about. Now, we've had this lovely light story, but the whole the story of wildlife is and caribou and reindeer is not always a happy story, and right now we're seeing a lot of difficulty in the world. You've also written about the decline of the numbers of wild reindeer. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, sure. It is massive. It's been huge declines over the centuries. Well, even in the last 120, 150 years. Sometimes, for instance, in Canada, there were 2 million head. They're now down to 800,000 across the country. And the worst case, the North Quebec Leaf River herd has dropped over 92%, from 700,000 to 5,500. That's a horror story. The same thing's happening in Russia. 18 of 19 herds have dropped by at least 50%, from 2 million to 1 million or 800,000 in some cases. And it's a horror story right across the north. And it's a mixture of lots of different causes. There are 17 different causes. I'm not going to read them all. That would be horrible. But let's face it, they're mostly to do with human interference. Reindeer are very susceptible to any kind of interference. So mining, oil exploration, noise pollution. In Russia, you've got the nuclear situation, pipelines everywhere, even simple things like snowmobiles, ATVs, even cross-country skiing, which is ridiculously to think of, because this cross-country skiing packs the snow, which means wolves can get on the snow and manage just as well as the caribou or the reindeer. And then poaching is another one. So we've got a whole lot of human factors, and on top of that, the reindeer have overused their resources. Imagine reindeer migrating, as we've all read about, going to the same place year after year after year. They feed on lichens and they eat them like mad. That's their major diet item. The lichens take years to regenerate, tens of years, sometimes even more than that. And so they run out of grub. So what's going to happen? Not good. The Finnish people, the old people, thought that the reindeer went up to the north and couldn't manage because they were eating lemmings, which of course is not true, but they were indeed finding that the lemmings had eaten all the grass that they were used to. And so a problem. And it's very difficult to reverse. Think about the price of a 4-litre can of milk, the sort of thing we in Canada are used to down in the supermarket here in Saskatoon. $4 or $5 for a 2% can. You go up to the north, 3 times as much at least. So the people in, for instance, that Quebec herd suddenly have to rely on food brought in, either by plane or on that annual ship, mostly by plane, and yet they're paying 3 times as much for milk because they haven't got any caribou left to hunt, or being limited, or in some areas actually banned. So a cultural norm that is as old as we can imagine suddenly being imploded. And that chapter I've called Crashes. not just declines. It's a pretty sad story, but what can we do about it? One hopes it'll recover, but I don't know.
Yes, and we often, I think we often hear that reindeer and caribou are a barometer of planet health, and that we can see, just because they are so sensitive, that we can really see the damage that's happening when we look at their numbers.
Well, even climate change is having an effect, because the climate is changing the growth patterns. Ice is disappearing. For instance, in that Mongolian herd, ice in the summertime was vital to get away from insects. And the ice is vanishing in those northern facing areas of the hills. So the reindeer don't have anywhere to rest, hide on the ice, so the bugs go after them. Not nice. Those who've been in the north know about mosquitoes and black flies, and we sometimes call the horsefly, some people have been bitten by them, up north, the bulldog. They're big and they hurt.
My least favorite experience of being on a beach is always when the horseflies show up.
Not good. Somebody's jabbing a 4-inch needle into your thigh.
Yeah.
It hurts.
All right. Well, I know we really need to touch on those important things and those serious things that are happening with our world. But I do want us to go back to a little bit of lightness. And we weren't sure if we were going to have time for this story that goes with this picture. But I want you. This is just such a delightful picture. This picture of this young person, and I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit more about this.
Well, we can only see half the picture here, but I'm sure you can change that. I took pipe cleaners into the Mongolian mountains because I thought it'd be something to have fun with the kids. And I showed them how to make this and that, and I created a little reindeer. But this young rascal took it a step further. I had shown them how to make their own glasses out of pipe cleaners, but he created this dragon, is the only thing I can describe it as. And I still can't see the whole dragon. I can only see the top half of the dragon and little boy. But maybe you guys looking at the picture can see the whole thing. And this young man came over with a big grin, as you can see, and it created a mythical animal. He must have heard about it from storytellers in his culture. And it was such fun to see some lad, there he is, holding what I can only think of would be a dragon. And, the blue legs, the white head, the black, just a wonderful moment to see a kid doing that sort of thing. I don't think they'd ever seen pipe cleaners before in their lives.
Just that sheer delight in the simplicity of being a child, just like being 9 years old and feeling like you're 9 years old on a horse, right?
Okay, if you say so.
So I can't even imagine being on a horse for 3 weeks. That story always kind of gets me cringing a little bit too. But you have so many wonderful memories and striking memories. And one of the last stories that you've chosen tonight is a really lovely story that starts with a little bit of soreness. So would you like to share that story with us?
Okay, we've been riding for several days, as we've alluded to, and we come down a big steep mountain slope into a valley where there was a reindeer camp. And when we arrived, my right arm was swollen between the wrist strap and the elbow. And so much so that I couldn't hold a cup of tea. Now, with my background, a cup of tea is a kickstarter for the day, and not being able to hold a cup was pretty serious stuff. I tried Tylenol, see if that would take the pain away, reduce the swelling. Nothing. Well, Biamba, our wonderful translator, said, why don't we go over and see Sayan, the shaman? She lived in her own urts, that teepee thing. And so we went over there, and the first thing that happened, I see her, she's got cataract. She's 103 years old. Let's be clear about that. She's 103. And her cataracts are completely white. I don't think she could see anything at all. And one of the cultural things in Mongolia is that you must not point your feet at anybody. There are lots of other ones, but that's a crucial one inside the urts. So I sat down, struggling not to do that. But this old lady without being able to see, said, if that man has a bad knee, he can point his legs. So she had hearing that must have been quite extraordinary, even at 103. So Biamba explained my problem, and she called me over to sit next to her, and she started to palpate my arm and feel it and talk to Biamba. And then she reached behind her and produced a big fleshy leaf about a foot, or in old money, 28, 30 centimeters tall and about 8 inches, whatever that is in metric, wide. And she said, take that leaf, heat it up on the stove in the hut you're staying in, wrap it on your arm, and do that 4 or 5 times during the night. Well, of course, it wasn't going to stay there, but I had bandages, naturally, carrying first aid kit. And so we followed her instructions. And several times during the night, I put the leaf on the metal stove, wrapped the bandage, woke up in the morning, arms normal, no trouble holding a cup of tea. Great. So I said to Biamba, let's go back and thank Sayan for what she did. So we go back over there, we sit with my leg pointed out, of course, because I'd had knee surgery, and we started to chat, and I thanked her. And then it turned out that we had very similar family structure. Sayan is a shaman. Her daughter, whom I'd also met, called Send, is a shaman, and our son, and there's her grandson, Sayan's grandson, is the veterinary technician we've been working with. So it's very similar because I'm the veterinarian, my wife's a physician, our son is a physician. So we have 2 physicians and 1 vet in both families. At this point, Sayan invited me to go over and sit with her, and Biamba took this photograph. And it's one of my striking memories that I don't think I'll ever forget, of this amazing old woman having treated me with some medication. I have no idea what it was, but it must go back, cultural history, way, way back. How many hundreds, how many thousands of years of accumulated knowledge of natural remedies in that environment? I have no idea, but obviously a very long time and a highly effective treatment. That winter, sadly, at 103 years old, it's no surprise, she died. So it's probably the last photograph ever taken of her by Biamba. It's a kind of a magic memory.
And there's so many lovely details in the photograph itself, the musical instrument she's playing, and the piece of cedar that you're holding. Such a delight in that photograph. Yeah,
the fiddle is a horsehead 2-string fiddle. The routine obviously made with a tin can and a piece of stick, but that's the standard musical instrument that I saw being played in Ulaanbaatar and many other places.
All right, well, I'm going to go back to the Q&A and the chat box. So here's another one of our storytelling friends from another part of the country, Pearl Ann Gooding. She says, my heart went out to your butt, sitting in a saddle for 3 weeks on that horse. Then she asked, did you ever ride a reindeer? Or were you pulled on a sleigh by a reindeer?
The answer is no to both questions. First of all, they don't use sleighs in the Tsaatan community. As I said, there are 4 breeds. That's not one of the breeds they've developed. Secondly, I'm way too heavy to ride a reindeer. I saw them being herded. I saw people riding them just because they wanted to ride them. I saw a young boy throw a blanket over the top of a reindeer that was grazing, didn't have a halter or anything on it, and throw a leg up over and climb on. So riding a reindeer is pretty routine stuff for them, but not for 90 kilos of Western veterinarian.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so we'll read some more comments here. Cynthia Stock said, fantastic stories, Jerry. Noah and I are enjoying this very much. And then Tim Roberts asked, has another comment. Jasper Evans did much work on camels in Mongolia. Sadly, he passed away several years ago, and had a lovely memory from Jasper.
Well, let me quick comment. Tim was the best man at our wedding, 52 years and counting. So we have known him a few years. He and I shared a house before Joe and I got married.
So we're coming close to the end of our time. We didn't want to, we thought that this was a nice amount of time to share a Zoom meeting. But if there are any other questions, please pop them into the chat box or the Q&A, and we'll check those. Jerry wanted me to say thank you to Jan Martel, one of our dear writers here in the city, who wrote a lovely foreword to the book. Once again, here's the cover: Reindeer Reflections, Lessons from an Ancient Culture. One of the things that helps writers and booksellers are reviews. And so Jerry reminded me the other day that when you go onto a site to write a review, if you're online, go to the .com sites, not the .ca sites, because they have a wider reach. The .com sites have a wider reach. And like I said before, we're coming to the holiday season. There are many different holidays coming up in the next couple of months, and books make wonderful gifts. We have this amazing bookseller in Saskatoon, probably my favorite bookstore in the entire world, McNally Robinson. And we're so delighted that Rowan is here with us tonight, and that we have been able to have this conversation and launch this incredible book. And like I said, one of the things I love about books are pictures. I work at the library and I read a lot of books that have pictures, but the pictures in this book are absolutely stunning. And I hope that you've been able to see the ones that we shared tonight.
Let me have another say before you.
Okay, we'll head it back to Jerry.
I want to thank you, Danica, for a very entertaining and lively discussion. And of course, Rowan, for setting all this up. And for all of you who've joined in and asked questions, I hope you do enjoy it. But especially for you, Danica, for such a lively storytelling sharer.
Okay, I have a couple more comments before and thanks, Jerry. It's always a delight to be invited to take part in something with you. And we've shared, we've shared some different adventures over the course. Nothing with wildlife, but we have had.
Come on, you've been hit by a moose.
But not with you. You weren't in the car with me. We didn't actually share that. And I have a story about reindeer too, caribou. When I visited my sister in Baker Lake, Nunavut, there was a herd or a group that were close to the town, and we walked out, and I can remember standing, and it was almost like a ballet. They stayed together in a group and they kept their distance, but they definitely showed that it was their space. We were very quiet, but they kept together, and it was just this lovely image that I have of this beautiful animal.
Good thing to remember.
So I have another comment. Rebecca Wilson says, I can't wait to read the book. Do reindeer in Mongolia browse on lichen too, similar to Canada?
Oh yes, it's a major food source, as indeed it is in Finland, and I think everywhere else. It's there. There are vascular plants that they use during the summer, and in winter they tend to go to areas where there are tree lichens that hang down from the branches, known all over the world, certainly in Kenya, as old man's beard, because they resemble an old guy's beard. Mm-hmm. But yes, lichens are a vital part of their, they really don't have anything else to eat during the summer months, and winter, old man's beard.
Okay, so I have another comment from Tim Roberts. It says, today has been wonderful for my wife Judy and I as we attended the funeral of a mutual friend, David, which brought back many memories of Kenya. So there's another.
Thanks, Tim, because I know it's about 2 a.m. or something ghastly in England, but it's great to see you. So well done for keeping awake, and lovely to hear from you. And
then Rowan's put a link in the comments that you can order the book from McNally Robinson. So that's there in the comments. Iga Stasiak said, thank you for sharing your insights about your relationship with the natural world. I have my copy and am looking forward to reading this book. And Chris Lindgren, another one of our Saskatoon storytellers, says, thanks, Jerry and Danica, for a great session. Great book, Jerry. And yes, McNally Robinson is an oasis for my household. It helps us through the winters, and we need a lot of help coming up. So
don't forget, if I may cut in, Joe and I frequently go to the little cafe associated with McNally Robinson, and there's the most hedonistic cake you can imagine on earth, the Shmoo Tort. I never eat anything else in there, but these days, being a married man, I have to share a Shmoo Tort. Sad, but they are amazing, totally addictive.
Well, I think that's it's a lovely place for us to say thank you to everyone, and we'll send the last word back to Rowan.
Great.
Thank you both so much. So on behalf of McNally Robinson, thanks to Jerry Haigh and our host, Danica Lorer, as well as Rocky Mountain Books. I'm so glad you could all join us tonight. As we've mentioned, Reindeer Reflections is available online and in store. And it's always nice to hear your lovely comments about the store and the Shmoo Tort. So come by and see us sometime. Have a great rest of the evening, everyone. Stay warm.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Rowan. Thanks to